Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to this reading for today. It is a very special pleasure for me to be introducing our guest speaker. But before that, let me begin by thanking some of our sponsors who have made this event possible for us today. The Atticus Fund of Goethe University, the Hessische Film- und Medienakademie, Verein der Freund und Förderer, Foundation for International Relations at Goethe University, and lastly, Contrast, Trust in Conflict in Political Life, an excellence project by the Research Center Normative Orders and funded by the Hessisches Ministerium für Wissenschaft und Kunst. And our guest today, who will be introducing the film ARANYER DIN RATRI to you, is a professor of cinema and media studies at the School of Arts and Aesthetics at Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi. And she did her PhD in cinema studies from the Tisch School of the Arts from New York University. And before that, she has been an independent filmmaker in India since 1986 and is also the founding member of Media Storm, India's first women's film collective, which received the Chameli Devi Jain Award for Outstanding Women Media Professionals in 1992. She's also the author of Bombay Cinema, an archive of the city, a foundational account of Hindi cinema, which investigates urban types like angry young men, dangerous psychotics, street loafers, sex workers, and gangsters in globalizing urban spaces, and teaches us to see the city of Bombay in a very new light. But the book's significance moves beyond Hindi cinema and the city of Bombay and is an important work on the cinematic city itself. She's the guest editor of a special issue of Bioscope, South Asian Screen Studies, where on an issue on cinema and technomateriality, which was published in 2013. With Nipa Mazumdar, she's also the co-editor of a Wiley Companion to Indian Cinema, published in 2022, which not only pays particular attention to regional cinemas in India, but it also investigates the shifting paradigms of technology, aesthetics, and the archival impulses in film. Her current research interests include globalization in film culture, intermedial encounters, and the intersection of technology, travel, design, and color in 1960s Bombay cinema. Apart from her work as a scholar, though, she has taught and mentored several cohorts of students at JNU, including myself, and many of her students have continued to make strides in cinema and media studies in various national and international universities. Not only do I owe my formative training in cinema studies to her at JNU, I thank her for inspiring a sensibility in me for being an international scholar pursuing this discipline. Please welcome Ranjani Mazumdar.
Thank you, Ritika. That was really nice. And it's nice to meet 3 students of mine here in Berlin are doing very well. And so first I would like to thank Vincent Hediger, Ritika Kaushik, of course, and Daniel Fairfax for inviting me to present in this wonderfully curated series on Satyajit Ray's work. Thanks to the Deutsche Museum, which has made this year-long series into an event with an afterlife, since the recordings will be available for the future. As a leading auteur, Ray's work has displayed a distinct signature style, evident in the formal universe of his films. It is this distinctive style marked not just by a relationship to cinematic realism, but also by several other kinds of modernist interventions drawn from various art cinema practices that catapulted Ray into a world of international auteurs. He was viewed as a cosmopolitan director, linked primarily to his perception in the West, often compared to Japanese filmmaker Akira Kurosawa for the kind of international circulation and accolades he received. Ray was showered with the kind of praise no Indian filmmaker has ever received, even as criticism of his work shadowed him throughout his life. There are many ways in which Ray's cinema has been viewed, and there are various stages to the development of his craft from the 1950s to the end of his life. Much has been written about his work by enthusiasts, scholars, cinephiles, and other filmmakers. Indeed, he is probably the most written about director from India, and his aesthetic considerations have influenced the output of several filmmakers from other parts of the world. So when a curated series such as this is held, it seems useful to find new strategies to help negotiate some of these well-known films. After much thought, I decided it would be interesting to engage with the spatial imagination at work in ARANYER DIN RATRI, or Days and Nights in the Forest, and reflect on how this style departs from two of his earlier films. The first is Mahanagar, or The Big City, released in 1963, whose central narrative unfolds in the city of Calcutta. The second is Charulata, The Lonely Wife, released in 1964, set in 19th century Calcutta, which unfolds largely in interior space. Days and Nights in the Forest, on the other hand, is set primarily in the outdoor location of a forest area inhabited by the Santals, a tribe that resides mainly in the eastern parts of India. The place in the film is Palamau in the state of Bihar, where the film's male protagonists arrive in a car. I want to bring these three films together for a reason. All three deal with interesting female characters. Mahanagar takes us to the experiences of a lower middle class household where the couple experiences tension when the wife, Arati, takes on the job of a saleswoman at a firm to help with the financial pressures at home. Charulata is about an upper middle class bored woman named Charulata, also played by Madhuri Mukherjee. She is acting in Mahanagar as well, whose husband Bhupati runs a newspaper press, which keeps him busy. He invites his cousin Amal, played by Soumitra Chatterjee, to pay some attention to Charu, little realizing how this act holds the seeds of forbidden love. Charu and Amal share an interest in literature, and Amal has ambitions to become a writer. The world experienced in these two films is largely within the class dynamics of the main characters and the rhythms of their daily lives. In Days and Nights in the Forest, it is the educated and westernized middle-class world with their sense of confidence and self-belief that is the main theme and object of critique. For this, Ray decided to move all the characters to a location outside their daily existence. Bansi Chandragupta, one of the great production designers and art directors to have worked with Ray, designed the space for all three films. The distinctness of the style is something to reflect on. Charulata works largely with an architectural language, using the space of the home to create, through vivid details, an upper middle class milieu. As you can see, these include wallpaper effects, Victorian-style furniture, cupboards and glasswork, etched with decorative motifs, tabletops with carved marble tops, and corridors with intricate floor patterns. The emotional resonance of the film, the tensions, yearnings, and conflicts are articulated through camera work that explicitly creates an architectural form of expression. The relationship between architecture and cinema has always been deep, and when we evaluate the work of film auteurs, these elements need to come to the fore more often. Bansi Chandragupta worked with Ray for many years, and they clearly shared an intense wavelength. In Charulata, the dramatic tensions linked to forbidden love are rendered explicitly in architectural terms. In this clip from the film that we will just see, Bhupati, that is Charu's husband, discovers that his printing press is in trouble because he has been swindled by his brother-in-law, whom he trusted. The act of betrayal is played out at two levels. The first is the brother-in-law's swindling, which Bhupati narrates to his cousin. The second is the potential betrayal that hovers in the air if Amal and Charu act on their feelings. See how this spatial language is carved out through camera work, sound, and architectural space. This is only one of the many ways in which architectural language is deployed in the film. We hardly see any images of Calcutta, which was probably part of the plan to make interior space echo with the historical moment the film depicts. We are connected through the newspaper, the gathering of men in the house who talk about events in the country and abroad. But there is no direct encounter with recognizable sights of the city. This could have been both a creative choice and one based on the financial pressures of trying to evoke the space of a 19th century city in the 1960s. Sorry. Okay. Charu's world as it unfolds in the film is simultaneously an emotional and architectural trap, conveyed with subtlety in the way she uses binoculars to look at the inside and the outside. In Mahanagar, released a year earlier, Ray used the space of the home, a low middle class household where a couple lives with their child, the husband's parents, and his sister. The house is small and cluttered, and this is something captured very well by Chandragupt's set design. Details of weathered clothes, curtains, utensils, and walls with a million objects hanging are aged with skill. The tension between Aruti and Subroto, the husband, played by Anil Chatterjee, takes place primarily inside the home. There is no extended space here for camera movement, which shapes the way Ray frames the characters and their interpersonal dynamics. These are some of the ways in which close-ups of the faces convey the growing tensions. In this image on the left, we see how a ladder is used to create depth in the frame, with Subroto's unhappy expression almost always foregrounded. The architectural expression here works through a cluttered home setting, combining a flattened effect with depth used largely to foreground a shortage of space, as in the next two images. Density and constant activity make up the daily life of the household. Aruti performs her movement from work to home and back to work carefully. Her public outings reveal a different kind of spatiality. Here is her Anglo-Indian friend Edith, whom she meets on her first day at work. She also visits her home, and we get another kind of detailed density of an Anglo-Indian household. Anglo-Indians are a mixed race minority living in India. Minority communities of a certain class have always had a way of storing their memories through objects. And this is something we see here in the clutter in Edith's house when Aruti visits her. Bansi Chandragupt's detailing here is very different from the detailing in Aruti and Subroto's house. In Mahanagar, Aruti's newfound happiness as a working woman causes distress in the family. Her desire for independence and freedom must therefore be sacrificed for the family's stability. Ray locates the protagonist's desire for self-worth and identity through a reversal of the home and the world that guided the cultural consolidation of the Indian nationalist movement. Through minimal dialogue, gestures, and references to a world outside the home, spectators see a transformation of individual identity that begins to affect the marriage. If Charulata's daily life invoked a sense of boredom for its protagonist, Charu, in Mahanagar, there is little time for boredom, with the pressures of everyday life impinging on the routines of all the characters. The tension in Mahanagar is amplified not just because Subroto is insecure about his wife's public life, but because of the father-in-law's refusal to accept this break from age-old tradition. Both Charulata and Mahanagar are films that reframe and interrogate some of the ways in which the women's question emerged during the 19th century social reform movement in Bengal. The political historian Partha Chatterjee says 19th century women's reform became unimportant with the consolidation of nationalism and nationalist ideology. Indian nationalism was built on a separation of the domains of culture into two spheres, the material and the spiritual. The material is where the West had proven to be powerful through science, technology, rational forms of economic organization, and statecraft. This had given European countries the power to subjugate non-Europeans. Nationalists in India believed that these superior techniques needed to be incorporated by the subjugated. But the uniqueness of the nationalist project would be to protect the spiritual, which the West could never colonize. The spiritual was thus mounted as superior to the West. This cultivation of a material and spiritual dichotomy was linked to another dichotomy, the outer and the inner. The social space on a day-to-day level was divided into the home and the world, and these roles were gendered. The material outside belonged to men, while the home was where the woman could protect the so-called spiritual essence of India by becoming the guardians of tradition. Indian nationalism in Bengal consolidated itself through a return to the past to invoke images that could fit an eternal idea of spiritual India. The threatened westernization of Bengali women became a concern in 19th century literature, songs, paintings, farces, skits, and so on. While women's education was considered important, it was equally important to maintain a distinction from a Western counterpart. As a conservative imagination became more and more prevalent in nationalist mobilization, women's desires and aspirations became marginalized to frame the anti-colonial language of resistance. Ravi Vasudevan, who has also been a speaker in this series, refers to this as the unfinished agenda of history, which Ray reframes in several of his films to stage the women's question differently. There is a return in Ray's cinema to seek out the repressed dimensions of the former self. Unresolved and unrealized pasts haunt the characters, and the director uses their expressive force to reanimate and reframe the present. The unresolved past, says Vasudevan, appears as the unconscious of the contemporary. The unfinished agenda of history makes Ray return constantly to the subordinate place of women. Thus, in Charulata, the home is the space of repression and unfulfillment, but for an upper-class woman. In ARANYER DIN RATRI, we move to a cosmopolitan, contemporary, and educated middle class. Both men and women are presented here as modern individuals, and that you will see from the film today. And the characters are not shown as part of their daily routine as they were in Mahanagar and Charulata. We literally land up in a forest area, a tourist spot, where 4 friends encounter 3 women, 2 of whom are also visitors. The subtleties of these encounters remain quite different as nature, landscape, and outdoor spaces take over. This is also a film that was released at the end of the 1960s when Bombay cinema was making its move to color with the arrival of Eastman color stock. This poster of Mahanagar is revealing since the color of the lipstick is highlighted in an otherwise monochromatic image, making clear that a sensory awareness about color was in the air. Aranyer is a black and white film with 2 female stars from Bombay cinema, Simi Grewal and Sharmila Tagore. At the time the film was released, Sharmila Tagore was a major 1960s sensation in popular Bombay cinema. It was with the arrival of Eastman color that travel across the country became a major part of the narratives of popular cinema in the 1960s. Color's arrival, along with lighter cameras, led to a desire to break out of the physical confines of the studios. Travel across India's landscape and the world became a recurring feature in films, with trains, planes, and automobiles as the chosen modes of transportation. India's vast hinterland, with its mountains, rivers, dams, bridges, and forests, now occupied the cinematic imaginations. Indians began to see India for the first time. It was in this decade that Kashmir, with its snow-capped mountains and its green cover, emerged as a major attraction that was repeated in film after film. This travel structure became ensconced in the popular Bombay film form with a new form of cartography and the impulse to map embedded in the movement across space. The narratives could be anything: romantic love stories, lost and found sagas, detective thrillers, or spy films. The most important element, however, was the colorful unveiling of India and its landscape. In virtually every film, spectators encounter a range of locations that involve little events, sites where the individual is forced to interact with both the natural and artificial worlds. There was a coming together of vehicles, the highway, and emotional states of being. It is not surprising that Ray distances himself from the popular form by reimagining the tourist encounter in ARANYER DIN RATRI. The film opens with 4 friends arriving in Palamau by car. They are discussing a travel book written by someone years ago. Ray's use of landscape is not overtly fetishized, though there are traces of that too. The forest generally appears neither frightening nor very welcoming. It is just there as a space of mystery and magic. Unlike Bombay films that frequently used India's mountain terrain to create backdrops for the narrative, especially song sequences, Ray mobilizes the landscape consciously as an outdoor space with critical elements that require some discussion. The figure of the tribal, not always taken seriously in popular cinema, is placed as a major presence. But there is an ambiguity to this imagery. Simi Garewal, the actress, a major fashion icon and film actress from Bombay, plays the role of Duli, the Santhal woman that Hari, one of the characters, falls in love with. Her skin was darkened for the film and appears almost like a mask. In the sequence that I just want to show, you can see the display of certain assumptions and the shallowness of an educated middle class. It is amazing to see the performance of class here, especially in the way one is made to swing the fan. Shekhar's casual and sarcastic remark, tribal welfare, refers to the institutional structures constitutionally mandated after independence to protect the rights of tribal communities. Deep-seated hierarchies of caste and class are on display here. When Duli comes into the room to sweep, the men are aware she is there, but they continue to talk without any overt acknowledgement since class differences allow them this privilege. The woman fanning them adds to the naturalization of hierarchy. There is a kind of obscenity here that the film subtly tries to unravel. The Santhal community is concentrated in some of the eastern states of India, and they are the 3rd largest tribe in the country. They are known to have fought against Britain's taxation policy in a major rebellion that took place between 1855 and 1856 and preceded the well-known 1857 mutiny. The Santhal rebellion saw members of the community and lower caste peasants take up arms to fight against colonial rule. The Santhals even today rely on forests for their livelihood. They are also known for their dances, which they perform at village fairs and festivals. Santhal music, dancing, and characters like Duli are drawn into the way Ray stages his minor encounters in Days and Nights in the Forest. Deep pasts emerge here to puncture the upper caste iconography associated with nationalist mobilization. Ray's use of the forest area belonging to the Santhals reduces the focus on interior production design to a minimalist form. There is a circuit house, the home of the women, an outhouse, and the shacks where the 4 friends drink. This is one drunken moment of narcissistic and existential crisis in the film. So that is Oshim, played by Soumitra Chatterjee, who says, the higher you go, the lower you fall. He's referring to his work in Calcutta, where he works in a corporate organization and doesn't really like his job, but doesn't have the guts to leave it. And so he uses that constantly as a way to talk about himself. And there's this narcissistic quality that you will see in the film. So where was I? Okay. So these sights, along with the magical ambience of the forest, the movement of the sun, and the village fair, provide the film with a texture that is very different from a typical touristic encounter. Surface tensions, both skin deep and historical, come to the fore. Space is not static, but simmers with traces of deep-seated hierarchies, histories, and memories. In a moment in the film, a newspaper is burnt by one of them, as if to force a temporary break with civilization. This moment transitions to an impressionistic and magical movement through the forest, shot and edited beautifully, and yet the exchange of words remains revealing. This is the outside of the shack where they all drink regularly. The film uses a local fair dramatically, which Bansi Chandragupta seems to have created skillfully. The design of the local fair was intended to have all the characters meet at a typical Santhal fair, a place where different pasts and presents could come together. You will see how this fair is elaborately staged with very complex editing to move between different character viewpoints. It is like a long, extended climax of very personal, individual moments staged via a very public village festival as the connecting thread. Here is a fragment from the sequence to just give you a sense and not a spoiler. With Days and Nights, Ray ventures into a different order of conflicts. Here too you will see very strong female characters who can stoke a crisis of masculinity. But there is also an attempt to encounter the arrogance of an educated middle class via an encounter with marginalized communities and otherness. But we should discuss all these thematic concerns after the screening of the film. Thank you. I just want to add one thing. Please remember that the Charulata and Mahanagar are films that deal with a Hindu household. And this is the first attempt to move away from the Bengali upper caste Hindu imaginary. You know, this film really makes it's the beginning of a different kind of cinema that Ray moves towards in his Calcutta trilogy as well. But Aranyer is actually, in my opinion, superior to even the Calcutta trilogy. It's a very different kind of complex film, very episodic. I have often felt that, you know, he must have seen Alia's Memories of Underdevelopment before he made the film, because it has that quality of this looking at the world from the vantage point of people who are not really very nice, you know, and how sort of scrapes off the skin of those kinds of people to reveal something deeper. Thank you.
Okay. Well, the burning question that's in my mind is what comes after Rabindranath, Karl Marx, Atula Ghosh, Helen of Troy, and then? Yes. Anyway, but it's such a pleasure to see this film like now, and there were things that I had not noticed in it before, and I think I want you to kind of unpack a few things around the use of language here. Because, of course, we hear a lot of Bengali, but we hear a lot of Hindi, we hear a lot of English, and the way the caste is, and class is kind of staged through language is very peculiar in this film. Of course, you know, the chowkidar, the kind of caretaker of the thing, speaks Hindi, very like North Indian Hindi, but there's also like the kind of English that they kind of switch between. So this very British style English versus the words like tribal welfare and stuff thrown in there. So how do we think of this in relation to when they're coming back drunk and then they start singing the song Sare Jahan Se Acha, which is, how would you translate it? Like, better, how great is my country? Like, so how do we think about this kind of like staging in terms of language and class especially, which seems so important for the film, right? Like, so I want to kind of hear you speak more of that. You already touched on those issues.
So I think the whole film is actually about class. It's about the confidence of the middle class, and use of English is very common in Bengali films because, Calcutta was the capital of colonial India, and most of us have gone to the middle class and the elite have gone to English schools. And so they speak a language they speak English, they also speak their regional languages. And in Bengal particularly, access to the English language was what made them, that's what gave the Bengalis the arrogance that they have carried over for a long time, because it was the first region in the country to come into contact with Western culture. So that's how it sort of built up over here. And Ray is very aware of this. He himself is a product of that kind of education. And he's very aware of the confidence and arrogance and the surface level quality that this kind of existence in Bengal gave to the middle class. And one of the things about the Ray's cinema is, and that's something a lot of people who are not scholars or critics have always recognized about Ray's films, that he's very good at understanding the shallowness of the middle class. And that is the subject that he took up very strongly in his later years, So he really takes that up very well. And he's very interested in this kind of psychological, surface level veneer of sophistication, below which you find this other kind of personality. And that's what the film is actually doing. So the use of language is very deliberate. They're all switching to English, and look at the references from Tarzan to other things that the references also, Shakespeare plays a very important role, and that memory game is so revealing. It's revealing because Ray himself was not at all into popular cinema, we know. He himself had the same disdain for all these other cultural forms in the country. And so all the names that crop up, they're very revealing. That's why Helen of Troy or Bombay is a very important question there, because Helen was a very important, well-known cabaret dancer in the Bombay film industry. So that level of snobbery which comes with access to English language and the world of the arts and culture, that's something self-consciously Ray himself is aware of, because he himself is a product of that. And only he could have made a film like this, because he understands what it is to have this kind of access. It gives you a kind of cultural capital in a deeply hierarchical country like India, that only people who have it are aware of. And so you need someone like that to be conscious of it in order to deal with it on screen. And which is why I find this film to be a deeply personal film as well, because he knows exactly how to deal with it.
And it's so interesting because the way the gender kind of question is revolves around this class issue too, where the difference in sophistication between the two, the family and these four men. And it's so funny, the scene in which they are bathing out in the well, and that kind of comes up again. And there is this sense in which the women seem to be always a step ahead of them. Of course, these bourgeois women, but also the tribal women. And there's a way in which laughter is used to show that. And I was wondering, like, how, because you talked about Partha Chatterjee, and you talked about the woman question in terms of nationalism, and how after Indian independence it had to be framed differently. And then this is, you know, as like Bengal is going through this like modernity post-independence, there's a lot going on there that in Mahanagar we see, and in Charulata it's kind of like a look back at the past to understand this from the point of view of today. So what's going on here, like with this sense of like these women like being just like so ahead, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I think Rachana, who spoke over here, she also refers to this as the beginning of a crisis of masculinity in race cinema, because in the Calcutta trilogy, which follows after this, you have male protagonists who are facing this kind of crisis in relation to women characters, very strong women characters. But here what happens in this film, because in Charulata and Mahanagar, you have a kind of search for modernity, and the modern question is being interrogated at some level, but it's about, you know, what does it mean to be modern, you know. It's totally natural in this film. You know, they've all accepted we are all modern Bengalis. That's the world. There's nothing else outside of that. In the other two films, because Charulata is still part of a colonial context, it's dealing with that question. And in Mahanagar, it's this world in which, low middle class world, they don't really have cultural capital, but it's a search for a kind of existence which comes with working outside the home and building a community outside the home through friendship. If you've seen Mahanagar, it is about that, about her ability to have a world and an existence outside of the family. But what is interesting here is that they have accepted their modernity. They're not anxious about their modernity. I mean, in the sense that this is their natural world, existence. And how shallow it is what is coming from the encounter with otherness and other kinds of women who they can't handle always easily. So that scene with Jaya, that's the sister, Sharmila Tagore's sister, who dons this jewelry, that's a gut-wrenching sequence of seduction where she can only perform her seduction by getting rid of her middle-class educated aura and taking on the sort of jewelry that a Santhalese woman wears and use it as a mask to perform her seduction. And when she does that, that's your Bengali man who can't handle her at that point. That's a total breakdown and a crisis. He wants her, but he can't deal with it. And that's to me, that scene is really powerful. And that is why I said at the beginning that Simi Garewal's use in the film, and she's a light-skinned, she's still alive, very much active, light-skinned, glamorous actress of that time, and to use her as a kind of blackface, you know, the deliberate darkening of the face, is to actually foreground self-consciously the act of masking. You know, so it's almost like the mask is being used to deal with these questions. You know, and you don't see the real people. Mm-hmm. You only see the mask, and you're only seeing what is possible through that. But for Jaya, it is, she sees a certain freedom, sexual freedom that comes from not being part of this kind of middle class existence, the weight of tradition, the weight of existence, in which the act of seduction itself is something you won't be able to manage so easily. I mean, if you've seen Charulata, there is nothing that happens. but everything changes inside. There's nothing that happens. It's sexually charged, but nothing actually happens. Here she comes to the point of making that move. And she can do it only with a kind of adorning of the mask.
It's so illuminating because the scene in which the men are bathing and later on they are like laughing about it, and he says that, oh, I just imagined myself wearing a bathing suit on the French Riviera. And it's so interesting because there is a masking going on there as well, that if you just pretend to be someone else, then the embarrassment is gone somehow. So it's... and
you know, there are some, I wanted to just say that there are some problems with the subtitling. Yeah. Actually not some, quite a lot. So this Shekhar, the unemployed one who's always brought in, who's part of the group because he's entertaining for everyone, he often uses the word choto lok, which is actually a pretty casteist term. Choto lok means... it literally translates into small people. So he uses the term choto lok, but they've translated it as peasants over here, which really doesn't convey the extent of what it actually means. And this is very common in Bengal. Don't mix with choto lok. Don't do this. You know, boro lok are people who have class. And then there are choto lok. And this is not something that you hear only, you know, you hear this a lot amongst the middle class. I mean, Amrita can also vouch for that perhaps. And, you know, I have heard it growing up a lot, not my immediate family always, because we were always being made to feel aware of the fact of how this was so wrong. But this is a very common way of talking amongst the educated. And those are things that he picks up quite carefully in the film, you know.
Just to chime in with the middle class thing, because Ranjani referred to...
I remember as a child when I used to visit my maternal parents in Kolkata, my relatives and everyone, I used to be told that if you do not study hard, you're going to have to travel in the Bonga local. And as a child, I didn't understand what Bonga local meant. But it was this train which caretakers would take every morning to come to Kolkata for working. And then they would also take that to return to the suburbs because that's where they live. So this is exactly the Boro lok, Choto lok subtlety that, you know, if you do not work hard, you're going to end up as the Choto lok. And the solution to that is work hard and be the Boro lok. So that's the dynamic of the middle class, a goal of how you should be the Boro lok.
Or how you should retain your class.
Yeah.
Keep to your class.
We have a question there.
Sorry, I don't know if we are already...
Yeah, no, please. Yeah.
First of all, thanks for the analysis or interpretation. I have another question, and it's more on the Adivasi woman. So I was kind of struggling with the movie in the beginning. I really thought about leaving the cinema because I thought it's very exotizing and kind of stereotyping. Oh, she's so sexually open, and is she also blackface? I mean, in a way,
yes,
I find it really hard to, in a way, bear that, and I wanted to know about your interpretation. I was a little bit, really struggling with that because we know there are ongoing, the stereotypes, they are portrayed, and the number of rapes of Adivasi women is really skyrocketing in India. So I would be interested. I'm not sure if the filmmaker, I don't know. I really could not figure out what kind of position he would have on that. Thanks.
So, the Adivasi woman, that's why I said at the beginning that Ray does not try to fetishize this space, but there are traces of it. Even in the portrayal of the Adivasi woman here. Now, the thing is that she is made to play the role of a Santhal, and there is a kind of visual culture in Bengal, visual culture that has been generated by the Santalis and also by, colonial writings and later others who have written about Santals, that this exoticization does exist about them, that actually one of the ways in which people talk about the Santalis is that they're very tall and elegant and have beautiful features and all that is there. Mm. And the jewelry that they wear, that is part of the story. And Ray is very consciously aware of this representation. And so to me in the film, I did not see this as a problem, though I know that some others have found it to be a problem, like you yourself are saying. But I did not see it as a problem because I feel that that is precisely what he's trying to interrogate. Because the woman is sexualized from the point of view of these two men particularly, Shekhar and Hari. So it's their gaze on her, and that's what Ray is trying to sort of investigate, And in filmmaking, it's very hard. And I really, I've been a practitioner myself once upon a time. But in filmmaking, when you're dealing with communities that don't belong to your own, that are not, you're not connected, if you're not connected to those communities directly, there is going to be an element of exoticization that will come in. There's no way out of it. It will come in because either you don't treat them with any humanity or you try to find some other language with which to deal with it. And some of this is very difficult to handle. It will come in. It's just something that, I've seen this in film after film because there's no transcendental language that we can find, They're all dealing with a kind of arena of visual culture. And they're trying to sort of pull things out of there. So it's a difficult question, whether Ray could have found some other way to deal with this or not. But she's actually quite a presence in the film. Absolutely. She's a very strong presence in the film and she's quite unforgettable. And that for me is very important, that she's unforgettable. And if beauty does that to some extent, I don't see what the problem is in handling it like that. It's better than demonization or making them look stereotypically like they are from a UN NGO documentary, or something like that whole history of photography that did that also. So to me, this is something very powerful, actually. It stays with me, and I've never forgotten this image from the first time I saw it. And even now, when I saw it again today, it seemed quite powerful to me. So I don't know whether it answers that question. It's a difficult question.
I'll also add that one of the ways in which the film frames is also kind of evident at the very beginning when we see them reading that book, right? So it's very clear whose gaze we are going to see before we even look at the people in the locality. So it's, I think we shouldn't confuse Ray's vision with the vision of these four men, right? Or the two men who give that kind of eroticized look. But of course, there are problems with that at many levels, which we know. But
I'm sure there is an element of Ray as well.
Yes, I mean, yeah. That's like the scene in which she's sweeping around and everything. It's like very.
You already said it. Her laughter, no? I mean, it's like the laugh of the Medusa. I mean, it's so strong and it's a kind of. I read it as resistance, and I mean she has agency, and she's, completely. She's a subject there, and not just an object to be looked at. So, in the middle, I kind of I could ease my tensions, but this was maybe also what I expected. So, I completely agree when I think about. German movies from the 1970s, oh my God, how women are then portrayed in some film. This is really then progressive.
We have a question.
Vincent's also.
Oh, and Vincent has a question.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this film, long ago, maybe 30 years ago, but of course I had another view on it. But today, like if let's say a Western filmmaker would have done this film, then we would have been like those who are into post-colonial studies, and so we'd have said, oh, this is completely exotizing and Eurocentric and all this stuff, because it's not only the woman there, the Santal woman, but the camera sometimes shows, so to say, the culture, the Adivasi, the Santali culture, also a bit, I mean, when the dances are going on, the camera is so close, right? Or when the romance between Jaya and this guy, then all the drums behind and the music and all. I thought if it would a Western filmmaker, we would have all said this is all completely Orientalist, right? So
I don't think they will attempt it now.
So I'm really not sure. No, yeah. I mean I still have to think about it. No, because it's not just the woman who has the Santali woman, but the Ray himself or the camera himself makes certain decisions how he looks at the culture, no? Santali culture. Or you have these two, the Jaya and the man walking, and you have see all these Santalis walking and all. I mean, it is, I would say, it reminds me a bit of Beyond Africa. Do you know this? Exactly, isn't it? Huh? And it was heavily criticized.
I don't know if it's like that, but it is the Santals are there as part of a backdrop, but they impinge on the ways in which these people are negotiating the landscape. And so they interrupt something in their world. They interrupt and bring something else to the world of the middle class people who have come from Calcutta. And they don't know how to fully process it. Ray is trying to stage the encounter as something that is disconcerting, and there is some element of discomfort, and there is also attraction. Both are playing a role over here. And it's a complex relationship. Because because he made it at a time when he did, he could make it like this. Today, I don't think people will even attempt it. So that's also a tragedy. That's also a very big tragedy that you won't even attempt it today because the discourse will not allow you to. So I think some value has to be given to Ray for having made the attempt at this point to deal with this question in a way which may not satisfy us today, but I'm okay with it. I'm okay for the humanity and the effort to deal with it at this point, and not always condemn every representation through this kind of framework, because that's also another trap which prevents us from actually encountering anything. And I think that is also very important. I mean, I know it requires guts for me also to say it in public, but it is important, and that's a recurring question. It's not easy. And it is not enough to say someone from outside the country, if they had done this, there would have been a problem. Inside, I mean, I'll tell you this. I'll tell you one thing. When Salaam Bombay was released, I mean, it's the same kind of question. When Salaam Bombay was released in 1988, I mean, it's not a great film, but it's a film. But the attack on the film, and the same attack I saw on Danny Boyle when he made Slumdog Billionaire, the attack on the film was kind of uncalled for, I felt. And it was all about the exoticization of poverty pornography, etc., etc. And then you think about it. Someone arrives in Bombay who has never been to India, drives from the airport into the city. If they are not shocked by what they see, that would be a problem. The fact that it is shocking reality. So to express that shock in their craft is not always a kind of way of condemning that place. And this is kind of argument has, so what the other side of the debate on both Slumdog and Salam Bombay was in India, oh, India has no poverty. No, so we should not be. And this is something that happened even with Ray's Pather Panchali, the first film. And this well-known actress from Mother India, she said, oh, what is this spreading stories about poverty in India? So there is a kind of nationalism at work here, you know. So I have very strong feelings on this question.
Yeah, just following up on this. I mean, this film's based on a novel.
Yes.
But as I was watching it, there was another novel that I was constantly thinking of, which is by Vibhuti Bhushan Banerjee or Aranyak, the autobiographical novel about this Kolkata guy who goes to Bihar to work as the administrator.
Abhijan? No.
No. The Aranyak.
Aranyak.
Yeah. And what we were just discussing, all those ambiguities and sort of the mystification of the Adipasi women, that's all in there. And it's almost like a contemporary filming of Aranyak and going through all these ambiguities, sort of the glorification of the landscape, but then also, you know, there's a whole argument about different notions of history and how, you know, the history of India as it is represented there. But the ambiguities of the central character seem to be very similar to what Ray seems to be working through in these four characters. And of course, the fact that Sumitra Chatterjee is maybe the emotional center of the film is also very significant.
He is the one with the real cultural capital.
Right, yeah, like, and he's the guy who has the cultural capital to access the bungalow and all of that. So that's very significant, and it seems like an experiment on himself to explore his own, you know, as you were saying, class and caste prejudices, and that seems to be very similar to Vibhuti Bhushan's novel. So it's almost like a sideways non-adaptation of that story.
Did you want me to respond to that, Prince?
If you want to.
I saw it more as a comment.
No, it's to underscore.
Yeah.
I have to follow up as well, because I think it's an interesting discussion thread that happened with the question and with Chagurika's response. But I'll take my cue from what Ranjani said about discourse. And I think this has to be mentioned because whatever Ray did, Ray was attacked. Ray was attacked. For Pather Panchali, you just mentioned Nargis' statement. When he did Nayok, he was critiqued because some said that he sold himself to mainstream commercial cinema to get money. Others said he's not part of the industry and he thinks he's part of the West. So, and this also ties up with what Vincent said as to Ray kind of trying to understand what his range is, because Ray was constantly bashed by all the journals during those times. Even some of the film society activists who were working with Ray in the movement, they criticized him for being very Western, for being so West that he's not rooted to the culture. So when I saw this, I felt that this is kind of Ray more trying to, you know, understand that can I depict a community which I do not belong to in a way which still does not exoticize it. So I understand the traces are there, but I still would not, I would still not judge Ray's intentionality. And that's just because of the discursive context in which Ray's work is situated in all those eras, in all those years, So that's my...
Yeah, I think when we are doing a reassessment or a series like this and revisiting Ray, we must remember how much he was attacked in the country. Always attacked. And once Ghatak arrives on the scene late, because his films are discovered late, Ghatak is seen as the political filmmaker and not Ray. And I remember those days very vividly. You had Ray camps and Ghatak camps. And it was all about And it's a very unfair comparison because here is a filmmaker with a massive output and you have another filmmaker with some films, and they're very important films and very powerful films. But the argument, the camps destroyed the debate completely at that time. And that's why I mentioned Kurosawa. I still remember Richard Pena told me, who ran the New York Film Festival for many years, he said, you know, Ray is like Kurosawa. He's big, he's very important, he'll be all over the world. But Ghatak is the filmmaker with a heart, with a throbbing heart. And, you know, we just... and he felt this. And I think Ray's cinema can only be assessed seriously if we recognize how skillful his craft is in dealing with these very surface constellations. Now, that is something that's very different from Ghatak's style. This is a very, you know, this man was just very talented. And that talent cannot be undermined. And obviously he's a great observer of life, of people, of human emotions. And those surface things matter to him. And he's picking up those things. And that's something that only, you know, that's something that he actually manages to capture. So it's there in his cinema, it's in his output. And when I saw ARANYER DIN RATRI, I can't tell you the impact it had on me, that it just feels, how can you make a film with such surface level details and then still have such an important, powerful core to it? That requires a certain kind of skill. There's a question.
Yeah, we have a question here. But it also reminds me of Rochna's kind of conception of Ray as an untimely historian, because it's very interesting how she distinguishes his work from Mrinal Sen and Ghatak, because and says that he had the kind of patience to sit with the present without saying much about it. You know, there's this like thing that his politics was that I don't understand the present, but I'm going to sit with it and observe it and then kind of, you know, work through it.
And I think it was at Ghatak's memorial after he died that Ray made, I can't remember where, but he did make he said publicly that Ghatak will always be remembered as a Bengali filmmaker, and he acknowledged that Ghatak had something deeply Bengali that he did not have. He acknowledged that, and he acknowledged that he was more a filmmaker of the world than of Bengal.
Besides the question of how he painted the picture of a culture, I actually don't know. I think he was pretty precise about the relation between, let's say, country and city, because what he showed was it was money that made this relation happen. And that's pretty precise.
I think that's really a very important observation about the film, because the role that money plays and the exchange of money, and even the last exchange of note where Sharmila Tagore writes her number on that note and gives it to her. Absolutely.
Transactional.
Yes. Yes. Yes, it's a world of exchange.
Yeah.
Of money.
Yeah.
Power.
Yeah.
Which always was power.
Yes.
He was pretty precise.
Yes.
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 Exactly.
We've been looking at the movie in terms of culture, of language, and of class. And when seeing the forest in the beginning, I think a few years later that would be Naxalite territory. And we hear the names, we hear Napoleon, Shakespeare, Karl Marx, and Mao. So we see the ingredients which would breed the insurgency. And it's only hinted at, but in Ghatak it's played out, and we see the Maoist insurgency. And then when you look at language, then they drive across the border to Bihar, and it's not just English is standing over the other language. It's also Bengali standing over Hindi or the local languages in Bihar. They say they will understand Bengali. I think Bihar was part of the Kolkata presidency, so there was a Bengali-speaking, English-speaking upper class. And then they break all the rules and they corrupt the caretaker, they corrupt the tribal woman, and in extension, they would also be ready to not just to grab the circuit house, but also land grabbing and so on, which is an issue with tribal people. And so we have all the ingredients of the Naxalite insurgency, which would come a few years later there.
And this is now Jharkhand. This is currently the Jharkhand region in India. Yeah. And the current protests against dispossession. Yeah. So this is all very difficult territory now, and has been for a while. It's very much there, and it's hinted at. This is released in 1970. And 70 is also Pratidwandi, the adversary, which is already dealing with this question in the city of Calcutta. So he's aware of what is going on. And even those 3 films that he made, he was attacked by his good friends, including the critic Chidanand Dasgupta, for being apolitical. And when you watch those films today, it's very difficult to call those films apolitical films. They are very political films. There is this kind of inner struggle in Ray on how to deal with this issue, which makes him interesting, because it's not very clear-cut. Ghatak was a much more political figure to begin with. He was already a member of the Communist Party. He was very much part of that progressive writers group, and so he was a politicized filmmaker. So his film practice is very different. It was going to be always more overtly political, and he had read also a lot more on political cinema, and so that's his form. But he was also somebody who was very drawn to melodrama, which Ray was not. Ghatak was really developed a very powerful melodramatic form in his films. And Ray's cinema is a very kind of somewhat cool contemplation or approach to life. So they're very different types of filmmaker. And I think comparisons are unfair sometimes. And that's what happened in the 80s, because Ghatak, who had been marginalized, his films were suddenly brought into circulation. And the first round of screenings, we were all there to see those films, and we were completely overwhelmed. Those 7-8 films of Ghatak's, we were completely charged by those films in the 80s when they were discovered and brought to Delhi. There were festivals and retro. He was discovered very late. And then it became about, we must bring Ghatak up to the same level as Ray. Yeah. It's interesting.
More questions?
I think it's quite late.
We can call it a night and give Ranjani a break. But thank you so much, everyone, for staying.
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions. It was very nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjani, for this wonderful talk.